Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ology podcast. I'm Brandon. There's a growing generation of Christians who are stirring, thinking that something just isn't quite right in 21st century American Christianity. Today, we kick off a season of interviews with folks who belong to this group. This episode, Scott sits down with Ology's own Tyler Korn to hear his stirring story. Thanks for joining.
Hey everybody, Scott here with the Ology podcast, and today we are starting a whole season of interviews that we're going to do with people to hear what we're calling their stirring stories. Now, if you've watched us or listened to us in the last several months, you're going to recognize that little word stirring. We use it quite a bit. And we actually just released a video, 2 podcasts before this one is actually going to release, on what stirring's about. So if you kind of want to know what that's about, you might want to back up a couple episodes and watch that, and then it'll help you understand. But in these interviews that we're going to do here in the next several months, we're going to hear real people and their real stirring stories about the moment that they started figuring out something that's just not quite right here. So today, we're going to start with an incredible human being. His name is Tyler Korn, and if you are familiar with what we do here, you'd be familiar with Tyler because he's been a part of this for quite a while. And so we thought we would start with kind of us. I didn't really want to start with me because that's documented. You can go and find that out. But with these guys, we have kind of heard about your guys' stories, just like how you got into Impact and stuff like that. And we will go over some of that again because I think it has some bearing on your stirring story. But maybe we'll go back, Tyler, a little bit and talk about your upbringing just a little bit. You are, out of the 3 of us, you are the one that comes from a very classic Christian upbringing. So if you want to elaborate on that, we'll get it.
I've never heard it said like that before. I guess, it's very, very traditional. If you were like take all of the Christianese in at least America and boil it down, I think it had like the most general experience, apart from being an actual pastor's kid. I had a pretty normal experience. Always at church. I mean, my whole life was defined by Christianity growing up. And we moved around just a little bit because of my dad finding his feet after seminary. But yeah, my whole life was just like, it revolved around Christianity and church and what to do and what not to do, and making sure that I was doing all of the right things. And I think that's a lot of people's experience with Christianity, is that it's a bunch of rules, even though they're really good rules, even though the things that you do in Christianity are very beneficial. It was still rules to live by, like basic instructions before leaving Earth, right? That was what the Bible stood for. That was it was more than just a toolkit or a toolbox. It was the 4th part of the Trinity. I mean, all these things that we've talked about, I've it's been me from the very, very beginning. And then being a pastor's kid came with its very, very strange things as well, with having this pressure of being known at school as the pastor's kid or just like the church guy. So I didn't really develop any really meaningful relationships with the people around me, because I don't think people felt like they could actually be themselves around me. Like I didn't get invited to any of the parties. Was I going to go to those parties? Absolutely not, because that would have been like the wrong thing to do, and I was always going to do the right thing. But it still would have been nice to be invited to those parties, Yeah. And so I was the pastor's kid that was the goody two shoes. I really was a massive people pleaser, still am. My brother was the rebellious one, and didn't really care as much as I did in the best way possible. I wish I was more like my brother growing up than what I actually did. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I think it does.
Yeah,
I think it's a little insight.
I forget all the time that you are an actual PK. I mean, I know you for who you are now, and because as you're talking, I'm thinking about, so like one of my good buddies from, he was our preacher's kid, and he's been on this podcast before. His name is Dwayne Curry, and Dwayne is a PK, and the whole time you're talking, I'm like thinking of him, and I know, like with him, the only advantage, and it was a big advantage that he had, was that he was on the varsity basketball team. So, and they won a state championship. So he was kind of a celebrity, PK, but I have to ask him. I'll see him in a couple of weeks. I'll have to ask him if he got invited to parties and stuff. I can't imagine that he didn't. But if you didn't have that to hang your hat on, it's a very different world for a middle school, high school kid growing up, for sure. So
I played like 4 varsity sports. So I was known. Yeah. I'm not saying I wasn't known. Like, people knew who I was. Mm-hmm. I think that people really just thought that, like, oh, he's like, I can actually be real. Yeah. Around Tyler, and there are memories of like people kind of testing me and seeing how I would respond in different situations, or that like they were joking around me just to see if I would put on the Christian hat then. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, honestly, like, I was very emotionally immature, very like relationally immature. I don't think I really figured out how to have conversations with people and build relationships until I got to college. And so that was another factor in me not really having many relationships growing up with depth. I knew everybody knew me. And it's not to say that I didn't have like friends to sit with at the lunch table. I could always find somebody. It was just a weird experience being a pastor's kid, because like I knew I just recently read a book. It's on my bookshelf.
Maybe it's under the pillow.
And it might be under the pillow. Oh gosh, who is the guy? I think it's written by one of John Piper's kids. And it's all about his experience with being a PK. Wow. And he said something that I had never thought of before, but I think I felt, was that people knew my dad and they assumed that they knew me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's it. That's 100% it. And that's got to be something that like only
in him.
Yeah. And everything he did for the church and all of his sermons. So people would come up to me. I've never seen them before in my entire life, because we were at a church of like 5,000. They would come up to me and act like they knew who I was.
Right.
And that's a weird thing for a kid to experience. I'm not saying I was a celebrity or like experiencing like celebrity kid trauma at all, but just those little things, I think they do shape like a young person's brain. And they came up to me acting like they knew me, and I was like, I don't know you, but I'm gonna act like we're best friends, or I'm just like gonna play into like this little game that we're all agreeing to subconsciously to play. Mm-hmm. Man, just weird stuff like that. Looking back on it now, was constant, even though I really had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about, because you're right. It's like when you do have celebrities, it's like, oh, that's Brad Pitt's wife. And, it's not like, oh, that's Linda. Yes, her identity Linda is kind of like tied through him, or maybe your dad is like Brad Pitt. He may be as good looking as Brad Pitt. I don't know, but Maybe, but it's like you're not really Tyler. You're the preacher's kid, or you're whatever your dad's name's kid. So
Yeah.
it's like that comes first. Like it's like who you are in people's minds is predicated first and foremost on your dad.
Absolutely. And that's why I think I grew up having a lot of identity issues, like really not understanding who I was just as a person and what I actually liked doing, what I enjoyed. I don't think I ever had a lot of experiences just to really just be Tyler, unattached to anything or anybody. And that's really hard growing up with a family, right? You really can't experience that fully, I think, when you leave your home. But I was just always doing something with other people that I think I just had this strong identity connection to, because I didn't have an opportunity really to just be myself. And I'm not putting blame like on my parents or church or Christianity or whatever it was. I think that's just how my brain was working at the time. A lot of weird identity stuff.
Yeah. And then you go off to college, where most people do find their actual identity, hopefully by the end of college. Well, they go through a crisis anyway, right? Because they're not with their parents anymore. For you, you're not at the church anymore,
Right.
So what was your, what were you trying to do when you went to college? Were you thinking of ministry at that point? Were you thinking of like just getting a job? Were you thinking of just playing soccer?
I honestly had no idea. I mean, I played, after my freshman year, I played one semester of college soccer. That was a terrible experience. It was at a small Christian school in South Carolina. And yeah, I just recently had my first girlfriend. We started dating that summer after I graduated high school. She was 4 hours away playing another sport, and I was lonely in a new environment. I still really didn't know who I was. I think once I had that girlfriend, that became a big part of my identity. And so, yeah, I hated that first experience. I never connected with any of the guys on the team. I was playing great, but it was like a small Christian school. I was never going to make it in the pros. That was never really a real goal of mine. I would have loved being able to do it, but I never really put in the effort to do that. And so I eventually made it to Charlotte. And when I came to Charlotte, it was also for that girl, honestly. I was really going to go wherever she was going to go. And it was still in North Carolina. It was closer to home, but far away. It was this massive university. I had just experienced the private Christian school, and I was ready to experience the complete opposite. And at the time, Charlotte was around 20,000, obviously a public school with who knows what was going on. And that was really interesting to me, and I was ready to do it. So yeah, when I got to college,
she went to UNCC and you followed her there?
Yeah. So we transferred at the same time. She was at a small school in Tennessee, small school in South Carolina for me. We both made it to Charlotte. Yeah. And really that was as far as I was thinking. I'm just trying to get back with my girlfriend in a different environment. I know I hate it here. And so I had no plans for majors, no plans for what I was going to do after I graduate. I was just here, honestly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
When did you start? So when did Impact obviously is a campus ministry. When did you first hear of them, and how did you start going?
It was So it was before I actually got there, because I had to transfer. This is a whole story, right? So I had to transfer. Before I transferred to Charlotte, I had to move back home, go to the local community college, because the private Christian credits were not going to transfer to a public university. So I had to go back home, take more classes to get enough credits to transfer to Charlotte. So, but she was already at Charlotte. So the first time I'm at Charlotte is technically my second year after graduating high school.
Okay.
So her first roommate was already part of Impact. She was actually a student leader of Impact. So it was this immediate connection with the community. And I actually had visited her while I was living at home, and her and I hung out with Justin Wallace. So before I'm even a student at Charlotte, I'm already been exposed to what's going on with Impact at Charlotte. Yeah, that was my first exposure. And so when I actually move in 2 years or a full year after graduating high school, I'm immediately connected. I do not have to search. Like, I don't have to do any of that weird hard work for incoming freshmen or transfers that don't know anybody. I'm just immediately connected into this really vibrant, massive community.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's lucky, because you're right.
Very lucky.
It's like, it is difficult for a lot of people to, and you know that you sometimes have seniors that find their way to you guys or to a campus ministry in general, and they've got 1 year.
Yeah. And Impact back then was very, very different than it is now. And I think we've probably talked a little bit about this before, but back then it was this massive community that gathered every Tuesday night or Sunday night with the community groups and just things to do, places to plug into. Like, if you were looking for a Christian community, it was readily available. And it was a church of college students. It wasn't a parachurch. It wasn't the ministry of another church. It was this church of college students. And when we start talking about stirring, that's when it really started happening for me. Because I had been exposed to this different way of church, a different way of doing Christianity. And I was like, oh, because I had grown up my whole life thinking that the way that I was doing Christianity was the right way. Mm-hmm. And I grew up thinking, if you're not coming to my church and going to a different church, then what are you doing? Like, are you really a Christian? Like, I had these thoughts in my head. So when I got to college, it wasn't just like this exposure to like this public university and different ways of thinking about like religion or how to live your life. It was blowing. It started to at least grow my box of what it meant to be a Christian or what Christianity was. Because now there's this community of just college students, not like, babies to 90-year-olds. It was just college students, and it felt different, and it felt good, and it felt more like the real thing at that time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's ironic too, because you came from a Christian university, a Christian college.
Well, I didn't go there because it was Christian.
Yeah, but I'm just saying you did go there. It's a smaller Christian college.
Yeah.
And it's like you go, so like everything opened up for you. I mean, obviously, it's a big, huge campus, number one. So that opens your world up, right? You go from a small campus where probably everything is like incredibly walkable, you know?
Yeah.
And then, you probably, most of your classes were in like one or two buildings or something like that. And then you go to, UNCC, and it's, your whole world opens up. You are around different people, but then not only that, you get involved in a community of Christians, and that stretches your what you thought you knew. Mm-hmm. So you think that's like the beginning of your stirring is those things, obviously?
Yeah.
I mean, because really you're a traditional Christian preacher's kid growing up in pretty much traditional church, right? I mean, they were like
Southern Baptist. Yes.
Church.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like it was very, very traditional with like deacons, and the only time that a woman was on the stage was when she was singing. I had never seen a woman like teach.
Okay.
Growing up, like that was not even. Never thought about that. Wasn't a.
You never had a female Sunday school class teacher?
But Sunday school was different. It wasn't as important.
Oh, okay.
But even like youth group leaders, those were all guys.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Dude, very, very, very traditional. Very traditional. Not to knock tradition, that was where I was coming from. So I had this very, very structured upbringing when it came to church. Church was the focal point. Like if you were not going to church, what were you doing? You could not be a Christian if you did not go to church. And I was always I was trying to be like the good Christian. So I'm always going to be at church. I remember there was this, right. I did get invited to like a New Year's Eve party. It was a sleepover with a bunch of guys. And I went to church. It was so New Year's Eve was a Saturday. And I stay up the whole night and I still go to church the next day. And I remember people saying like, oh, wow, that is incredible, Tyler. Great job. You're not missing church. I haven't thought about this memory in a very long time. But surely that did something to my brain. Like, okay, like I'm onto something here. This is the piece that we all need. This is the most important puzzle piece. So yeah. So my identity with God, my relationship with God was based on that as well. I grew up thinking that my entire relationship with God was based on what I was doing. Yeah. Was I attending church? Was I praying? Was I doing the right things, not doing the wrong things? It was about my actions. My actions were attached to my identity. And God was telling me that. God was telling me, Tyler, for me to love you, for you to have a good life, to you even feel like you're safe, for you to feel good about yourself, you need to be doing these things. And then when I got to college, the bubble starts to slowly burst.
Mm-hmm. I can vividly remember in a couple of churches, we were highly encouraged not to have lock-ins on Saturday night because no one would come to church, and that we couldn't really do that. We talk about it a lot, the official things that we're supposed to do, right? Going to church, you know, is an official way to show that you're a Christian. And on Sunday morning, that's the official time. So here you are. And for you like immediately, you guys, like you said, you have your worship times now at night. So that's like bursted. You don't have it in the morning anymore.
And I remember my dad telling me, Tyler, because I started telling my parents about what was going on. He's like, Tyler, I love that you're involved with this, but there's just something about Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
you
I was
still
like,
need to get up and go.
That can't be it.
Yeah.
Like, is it really about the time now? Like, we're just moving the goalposts. Like, this church isn't good enough, right? Or this time isn't good enough. So I started having, once I was exposed, and still having like this double life of me at college and then having family. And then I started experiencing the tension of what it mean to like really see what's on the other side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I interrupted you. Yes, we were doing.
No, talk about more of like how this is perpetuating in your life. Obviously, this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
How does it perpetuate? You kind of briefly talked because I can't imagine it's not good grief, you know. And I've joked with you guys before, you know, when I stopped going to church a couple of years back, my mom was always like super concerned about me because I wasn't going to church. And I'd be like, well, are you talking to my two other brothers who don't go to church ever? And the answer was no. So I can only imagine that this is just going to just get, you know, it's just going to escalate and, you know, and keep going forward. Talk a little bit about how it starts to continue down this road and maybe how your stirring starts to branch out into different areas.
Well, what was so wonderful about Impact when I was there was that there just so happened to be people that were okay with asking questions. Like for me, asking really hard questions. So being exposed to a different way to quote unquote do church, it really opened up this door for me to discover why I believed in what I believed in. Starting to ask questions like, okay, the things that I believe in, where do those come from? Honestly, like for me, it was never about questioning, you know, what we're doing now, like talking about church and all those kinds of things. Impact was a place where I could start to have these kinds of conversations of asking why I believed in what I believed in. It hadn't gotten to like the depth of what church is, the depth of what a real relationship with God is. It hadn't gotten to the depth of like, what does God's grace really mean for me, and the waves that it would make in my life like it has recently. But just like asking the questions of why I believe in what I believe in, those things, it opened up the door. That was truly the door opener for me. And I was able to do that with people in my life for the very, very first time. Because my entire first 18, 19 years of life, I just played the game. And everybody around me was playing the game. And we all collectively said, this is good. This is what it should look like. And you don't have to ask any questions. Because asking questions wasn't modeled to me at all. It wasn't as if like they were discouraged. I just didn't know you could ask questions about like, where does the Bible come from? Why am I going to church when I'm going to church? Why do I go to church? Like, what does community look like? What does it feel like? So I was able to have these conversations with like Justin Wallace and Nathan Evans and other leaders and my peers. And it was this massive, massive growth for me just to ask questions. I don't think I came away with answers. The biggest thing for me was just the space to ask questions and to be okay with not knowing anything and to be okay with having a conversation and having more questions. That was like the most fun thing in the world for me. I love doing that. That's like, and I sought that out almost every single day. It's like, what kind of amazing conversation can I have today? And that slowly morphed into like me really loving hearing people's stories. And I really started to love asking questions about other people and digging deeper into who they were. Because I think that was me also doing the same thing to me, So I would ask these questions to other people, and then I think I would also start asking them to myself. So I'm learning about myself as I'm learning about other people. And that's a big theme in my life to this day. I mean, it's really what we do on campus is asking people their stories and digging deeper into why they believe in the things that they believe in. And at the same time, my brain is also working out what I believe in and where those things come from. And so like, yeah, college was a massive, massive experience for me. I didn't care about grades. I didn't care about my major. I didn't care about what I was going to do after. I would never suggest that to anybody, but that was what was important to me. That's why I went to college. I didn't know, but like God opened up the door to myself, to learn about myself and for me to grow and just understanding what I liked to do and how my brain worked and looking backward and seeing those past experiences and how they morphed me into who I was at the time. But yeah, I didn't care about like my major. I was a religious studies major because it was interesting, because it was on topics that were very, very relevant to me. But I didn't do it because I wanted to teach religious studies. I had no idea. So yeah, but I'm still not asking questions about God, honestly. I'm not asking questions about church. What is church? Where does it come from? Do I have a partnership with God? What is grace? What is mercy? Like, how do I communicate these things to people that don't understand them? I hadn't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because you're in the stirring stage where like your brain is firing in all kinds of weird directions. And I can imagine like you having conversations with other Christians. Do you think you found like similar stories in yours? Were there a lot of kids who, I mean, obviously college is a campus ministry in a college, a typical campus ministry, let's put it that way. It's probably made up mostly Christian kids who went to school, went to church and youth group and all that kind of stuff? Or, so do you feel like you were having like the like Me Too kind of thing with other people?
I think to a small degree, what I think was actually happening was I was still trapped inside of a game. I was still playing a game because I was still doing Christian things. So God had not exposed yet that I thought. So my thought was, okay, God, I'm still being a good Christian. I'm still not like going out and partying and doing crazy college stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I switched like traditional church for college church. And inside college church, I was still playing a game. And I knew how to play that game really well. It still felt good. It was definitely Christian. So like check those off the list. I was still like honoring my father and mother, going to church, reading the Bible, praying with people, doing those things. And I still think the majority of my friends were still playing the game. So I had not been exposed, or God had not like exposed in me that, Tyler, you are still playing a game. You're still trying to play a game with me. And I'm not asking you to do that. That really, this is where I think our stories are similar. It wasn't until I graduated and I did not really have an opportunity to go to church where I really started to stir. Because
church, how you're used to church at college, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
because for the first
church you've been used to for 2 or 3 years.
And even like for the first 22, 23 years, I was still playing that church game in my head.
Right.
I did not know that yet, but I was still playing that game. And it wasn't until I stopped going to church that I realized I was playing that game. And so after I graduated, what I did is really not important. But I was not like, I was going to be the old person in this college ministry. I did not want that. And so I eventually like moved out of Charlotte, and going to church really was not an option for me. Going to church was really not an option for the next like 3 years.
Can you explain why?
And I was in a band that was based in Ohio, and we were traveling all over the place.
Okay.
And we were playing on the weekends, and we were never in town to go to church. So I didn't do church for like 2 years with that. And then I was working for a soccer team back in Charlotte, a professional soccer team. And like, I had no days off. Like I worked for 2 months. I had not a single day off, and it wasn't an option for me. And in those 3-ish years, I didn't know what was happening to me, because I would look back and I would say that my relationship with God kind of on the surface was neutral and really didn't morph into anything and didn't grow or decline. It was just there. But I think subconsciously God was like peeling away a lot of those religiosity layers. He was poking holes in that game that I thought I had to play to be in a relationship with him. And it wasn't really until I came back to Impact to be on staff to work with college students again, where it started to really expand. And I started to be a part of the thing that I started to lead the thing that I was a part of back in college. And so I was like on the other side of the wall. And I started to see all of the ways that we were trying to get students to show up to Christian things. And for me, like I was never really I didn't want to do that. I never wanted to convince people to come to Christian things. And so it started to really, my box of of who God was really started to expand once I started like being a professional Christian. And that comes with like its cons as well. Like I am a massive people pleaser, and everything I do, I feel like I have to please everybody, and all my relationships, everybody's got to like appreciate who I am and blah, 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 blah. It's not about that though. But once I was exposed to like the tactics that we were using to get kids to come to church, I was like, this can't be it. There's no way this is it. And thankfully, my wife and Chris were on the same page.
Yeah.
I really have had little resistance when it comes to asking these questions and stirring. The only resistance, honestly, is like people that are really set on like playing the game. You know, like it's never been people that are also asking these questions. It's always people that are like dead set on like, this is how it's supposed to be. And I mean, and that makes sense. But that was a big factor for me was understanding that the people that I feel comfortable around asking these questions are really the people that I'm closest to. Now, I have definitely been let down by people that I thought I was close to 100%. And that's kind of like I don't know. There's been a little some relational fatalities in my life, you know? And as a people pleaser, that's been really hard. And I still struggle with those kinds of things. But yeah, it wasn't until I was in ministry that like these things were starting to really, really come to light. And I started to ask the questions of like, okay, is this what it's all about? And I started to see the things in my own life that I had been manipulated to do when I was in youth group and growing up in church. And then I started to see it in every other church. Because I visited churches every now and then just to see what was going on. And it was still the same old thing. The people were just trying to get me to come to their thing. They were not really trying to help me. They wanted me to help them. Like I would go to churches and I would meet people and talk to people, and they were like, "Oh, you play the drums? Oh, you can run sound? Oh, you do this? We need you. Like you're needed here."
Yeah.
And there were moments where I was like, "Oh, okay, this could be the thing. All right, like I found my place." But for whatever reason, it just never felt right. My yuck meter was just off the charts when those things started to happen. And it never felt good. It never felt right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a common thread when people are stirring is because it's just because it's just the reality of the situation. You are in a different place.
Yeah.
And it's just organic relationships. You cannot, organically your relationships will not stay close when, those two pieces are moving in different directions. So yeah, I think when in the stirring things, maybe we should like emphasize too that these are not just like simple little stirring things that you go, aha moments in life. Like when you say, "Oh shoot, I've been mowing grass the wrong way my whole life. Yeah. I shouldn't be going back and forth. I should be going in circles." That's just really kind of more of a technique taste or whatever, it's like whatever's best for you kind of mentality. You do you kind of deal.
100%.
And this isn't really that. It's more of the idea of struggling with truth, right? And not necessarily struggling with preference. And so,
but
yeah. So tell me, so where does this go from here? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, okay. So yeah, okay. I'm going to try and wrap my brain around this. So I have never really had a lot of, I guess, internal resistance to learning new things. I think since when I got to Charlotte, I started to really develop my curiosity on things. And that was usually just focused on people, very focused on people. and their stories. Loved asking questions, loved learning new things from people's stories. And I think that I was able to be exposed to new ideas and not immediately resist them. Another part of that is when Chris and I started to rethink ministry for impact. We got connected to a lot of like house church, micro church, simple church movements. A lot of those people around the country, especially in Charlotte. And I thought that that was the key, that this new direction that we needed, it was we needed to rethink church differently and like what it did. We needed another repackaging of church and Christianity. And I was really dead set on that being the key, like micro church and simple church and like everybody come together in a house and still doing everything that a church would do, but just in a smaller setting. I was tricked into thinking that that was the thing. Like nobody tricked me, on purpose. But it was like, I was still susceptible to like the shiny new thing, right? Like there's light at the end of the tunnel. And so, yeah, Chris and I were really dead set on that. But man, we started to really ask questions about who God was. And asking questions about who God is, everything else was just in its shadow. Honestly. And so like 2020 rolls around and COVID hits and we're not on campus. We can't do anything with students other than have like Zoom meetings. And then shortly after that, we meet you, Scott, or Daniel. Shout out Daniel Hodges. Shout out Daniel freaking Hodges. One of the people that I can go to and ask real questions. It needs to be
freaking
one of the people. He's actually one of the few people. He doesn't know this. I need to tell him this. He's one of the few people that I can go to and ask a really hard question with and not feel like he's going to try and correct me. He's going to legitimately listen to me and think about it himself. And that's been the key, man. That's been the key. We started talking and he had heard that either he read your book or heard that you wrote a book. And I don't even think, and he gave it to me maybe. I don't exactly remember how this story is, but we eventually start hanging out, me, you, and Chris. And you start talking about church and how we always think that you have to go to church to get to heaven. You have to go to church to be this Christian. And that's when like everything in my life that I had experienced really came to this massive head to be like, I have been playing the game. I have been played and I've played people and I'm done with it. There's something that has to be so much more than church. The way that at least I've understood it, the way that it's been taught to me, the way that my entire culture has understood church. I think we've got it completely wrong. And I'm not sure what exactly it is, but I just know it's been completely off. And through our conversations, along with Chris and I on campus, discovering just how deep God's grace really is, and we call it like implications of grace, and us talking to students over and over and over, like we've had hundreds of conversations about God's grace. And it's changed my life. It's absolutely changed my life. And I truly believe that if you get bored of God's grace and talking about how good God is, then you really don't understand it. Because that's the story. That God has invited us into this perfect relationship with Him, not based on anything that I've done. And He gives it to me as a free gift. And everything else is just like secondary. It's a fruit of me understanding God's grace. And Scott, you painting this picture that God's grace invites us into this relationship which is actually a partnership. And I no longer have to do things for him. He just wants to walk with me, and he's inviting me into all these interesting, mundane, extraordinary. He's inviting me into a life with him, which is all encapsulating, which is this holistic way of living. It's not I put on my Christian hat and I take it off and I put on my work hat. It is this transformative idea that like I am no longer like this person that is attached to their actions. I'm attached to the partnership that God offers. Who cares about church? I don't care. Like, who cares about doing it the right way? Who cares about having the right theology? Who cares about like knowing the right things or like praying the right prayers or making sure that I'm reading the Bible the right way? Like all those things I have come to accept that God is going to lead me into a right understanding and right theology and doing all those things out of this perfect partnership with him. And I don't have to take care of those things to be ready for the perfect partnership. And I mean, Chris and I are just learning new stuff all the time. You know, like we're learning new stuff this week. We're learning new stuff from students and how they paint the picture of their life. And when we communicate something with them, they have this different take or a different way of looking at it. And I'm like, that's it. That's it. So that, yeah, man, that's been the past 4-ish, 5-ish years. And I'm also like a dad trying to be a good dad, you know, not trying to be a crappy dad. Trying to be a good dad is like the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. It's so easy to just like disassociate from your family, especially when there's chaos.
Yeah.
But even like this realization for me, and I know this is not everybody's stories. This is not everybody's story, and I'm very, very different because I have this mental thing that like if I find it important, then everybody has to find it important. If I enjoy it, then everybody has to enjoy it. I know that's not true. It's a Tyler thing. Chris and I joke about that all the time. But I've become a better dad because of this. And it's not because I have it all together or I believe that God's going to give me a perfect life. It's like, oh, like God is saying in the midst of the chaos, I am with you. He's not saying you're with me so we can escape the chaos. It's not like this. My son just got like this Lego rescue helicopter with like this rope on it. You know, he's not like parachuting down and bringing us back out. He's like, no, this relationship that we have is so good that it can exist inside of chaos.
Yeah.
And it can be peace inside of chaos.
Yeah.
And you don't need anything else because everything else is eventually going to break down and die. Like your dreams, Scott.
Yeah.
Right? I always go crash and burn. Like my dreams of God helping me escape this world, dead. My dreams of me having a perfect relationship with anybody in my life, including my wife, including my kids, dead. Well, because that's not the reality of the situation. God's not promising that. He's promising peace in the midst of chaos.
Yeah.
And that's made me a better dad.
Yeah.
Because I can be present with my kids when they're screaming for more dried cranberries, and I can just like be present with them, you know? And that comes from me realizing that God is present with me when I'm chaotic. And I feel like the world is crumbling down around me because I'm not getting something that I feel like I deserve or need. And I have this picture in my head of God sitting beside me, not staring at me, but him sitting beside me and saying, I know this is really hard. And I'm here with you still. And I found that comfort is just like, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it is. We talk about it all the time about this, the stirring, is like, back in the day, we used to, like, I think it was Audio Adrenaline had this song like called God's Shaped Hole or something like that. God's sized hole. There's a God-sized hole in your heart, and only God can fit in it, which, it kind of is super cheesy at the point, all right, obviously. But this is the idea that something's not quite right, and it is all leading to the idea, to that absolute fact that this is. I love that idea of what you said. Like, it's the rescue mission is not God coming in with a helicopter lifting us up and out, or even the old joke of like, God, get me off this island. We talked about this before, right? Get me off this island, and he sends a boat, and he sends a boat, and it's not really about getting off the island or whatever. It's about being able to abide, and allowing God to put light in the middle of darkness or the middle of chaos. So
yes, and he doesn't give us that light or that abideness through a structure or through things to do for him. That's been a big realization for me, is that God's light is a reality that I already possess. And it's not delivered via something external of God, right? He doesn't send something to me that's not him. That's not literally him. It's not like a gift he's sending me in the mail. It's literally him residing inside of me, him abiding in me. Because everything, if he did it a different way, well, then I would just like be obsessed with that thing and not actually him. Mm-hmm. But what he's saying, and all the time,
we do.
And he's not expecting us to understand it all the time and live according to it all the time. That's why, like, my relationship with him, my partnership with him is not something that I can correct or perfect or grow or get better at. Like, it is what it is. What Jesus did on the cross, he perfected their partnership. He perfected their relationship. And I just need to realize it. I need to be reminded of it. And then from that place, like, I get to remember that I do have peace. It's not that I have to ask God for it or do things so that God thinks that I deserve peace or understanding or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. No, the fruits of the Spirit are readily available for me. And it's a natural thing for me to do now. Like, the apple tree is always going to produce apples.
Right.
It is.
Yeah, if we really believe,
it's a byproduct of remaining. Yep. Right. But I feel like what I was told growing up, and even just like recently, is that like it's possible for Christians to not remain. I don't believe that. That's a trick. That's a lie, that Christians can lose their place with God. I just talked to a student like 3 days ago, doesn't matter. Their whole Christian identity was based on the fact that they could lose their place with God. And it was their responsibility to keep it. And I was like, yeah, that was me, 100%. That was absolutely me. But if we really believe in what Jesus did on the cross, and that was the perfection of our faith, that was the perfection of the relationship, then I have nothing to give more to it. I cannot grow it. I can't change it. Like, I can't like cut down the tree that I'm supposed to be remaining in. That is my reality. Mm-hmm. But like when I don't remember it, that's a response to me still living in like this broken world. But like, the apple tree is always going to be an apple tree. It's always going to produce apples, like there's the fruits of the Spirit are like something that I naturally do now. And we've been lied to that like we have to work on it ourselves, or that God's waiting for us to do something so that he can give us things. No, it's readily available. It's the prodigal son. It's the older son and the younger son.
Yeah. It's not like apples are way out there. God's put them out there. You got to go and find them.
Exactly.
The apples, the fruit is just, it's a byproduct of abiding and just being with him, entering into this partnership and doing your part as your partner. doing your part of the partnership, but
Right. Exactly.
it's the partnership isn't you,
Yes.
and that's a big thing. And you're, from where you were and where you are now, and we say this too all the time. And we'd say this again, we're not there. Far from it. Far from it.
Now, I know less things now. The older I get, the more I realize I know less and less.
Yeah, it's almost like growing to know less is almost the goal.
Absolutely.
In a weird way.
Absolutely.
But maybe we'll talk more on that some other time. But hey, this is the end of this podcast episode with my good friend Tyler Korn. Thank you, buddy, for doing this and for sharing your story. Anybody that's listening to this, we're doing these because we want people to realize, just like Tyler did when he was talking with, students at UNCC in the campus ministry, that he was not alone, in thinking that, something might be different, or he started, God brought people his way. God brought people my way. God brought the two of us together. And we do these because we want to let you know that you are not alone if you're stirring and you're starting to have these kind of feelings and something's not quite right. And we'd obviously love to hear your stirring story too. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can do that at the website, which is reologylife.com. There's a little contact form on the homepage. And you can also reach out to us via Instagram, which is reology_life, I believe. If not, Brandon's going to say that in the extra. Tyler, thanks, man. Have a great rest of your day.
Guys.
From the whole Rheology team, we hope these podcasts are encouraging and educational. Rheology exists for three main reasons: to reach, train, and equip those who want to go deeper with God in this partnership called ecclesia. If God has been stirring in your heart, where you are wondering if there's more than what you've been experiencing in today's 21st century Christianity, we'd love to connect with you, to hear your story and help you know that you are not alone. You can simply contact us via the website, reologylife.com, or reach out via Instagram at reology_life. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.